The Prince of Wales has admitted publicly for the first time that he was unfaithful.
Camilla Parker Bowles and her husband Andrew have decided to end their marriage of 21.
On a rainy Tuesday morning in 1995, a retired Army officer signed away the truth of his marriage. The world was told he was stepping aside for a future king, but his private logs tell a completely different story. Why did Andrew Parker Bowles really agree to become the villain of the century? The answer isn't about betrayal. It is about a secret that would have shattered the British crown. Here is the full story. The price of a 40-year silence. Brigadier Andrew Parker Bowles sits at a heavy oak desk inside his country home in Wiltshire. It is June 2026, and the world outside is watching the current health crises shaking Buckingham Palace. On the desk rests a leather-bound journal that has remained locked for over 3 decades. For 40 years, the public narrative surrounding the breakdown of his marriage to Camilla has been written by tabloids, royal biographers, and palace press offices. He has been cast as the complacent husband, the man who stepped aside willingly to let the Prince of Wales claim the woman he loved. But the ink on these private pages tells a starkly different story. The transition from a proud military officer to the most talked about cuckold in British history was not a passive surrender. It was a calculated, painful sacrifice demanded by the highest echelons of the British state. Andrew Parker Bowles was not an outsider peering into the royal fishbowl. He was the ultimate insider. As the silver stick in waiting to Queen Elizabeth II, he held a position of profound trust, leading the household cavalry and protecting the monarch during state occasions. He knew the unspoken rules of the institution better than almost anyone. He understood that when the private lives of royals collide with constitutional stability, individuals are broken to save the crown. On a specific Tuesday morning in January 1995, Andrew sat in a London law office, surrounded by high-ranking palace courtiers and legal advisors. The divorce papers in front of him contained a standard non-disclosure clause, a legal muzzle ensuring his absolute silence for the rest of his life. The world watched the announcement of that divorce with a sense of inevitability. King Charles had already confessed his infidelity on national television the previous year, leaving Andrew's public dignity in tatters. The common assumption was that Andrew was simply clearing the path, perhaps even receiving a quiet nod of appreciation from the palace for his cooperation. But the internal logs from that period revealed that the pressure on him was immense and unrelenting. Courtiers did not appeal to his vanity, they appealed to his fierce loyalty to the military and his children. They presented him with a terrifying prediction. If he fought the divorce or exposed the true timeline of Charles and Camilla's relationship, the ensuing legal discovery would drag the entire royal family through the mud, threatening the succession itself. Andrew signed the papers. By doing so, he knowingly accepted the role of the villain, the man who couldn't keep his wife, the man who looked the other way. The true heartbreak of his decision lies in the absolute isolation it created. He could not defend his name to his fellow officers in the Blues and Royals. He could not explain the truth to his friends at the polo clubs. He had to walk through the streets of London with the world's press trailing his every move, smiling politely while the headlines branded him a failure. At a regimental dinner in November 1997, fellow officers pointedly avoided his table, unsure whether to offer condolences or look away. Andrew maintained his strict military posture, refusing to offer a single word of defense. The palace achieved exactly what it wanted, a clean, quiet separation that kept the focus on a failing marriage rather than an institutional crisis. But as Andrew turns the pages of his journal today, at 86 years old, the cost of that 40-year silence is laid bare, proving that the biggest royal secrets are often hidden in plain sight. Some debts are too large to ever be paid in cash. A multi-billion-dollar shadow over Middlewick House. The removal van backed down the gravel driveway of Middlewick House in March 1995. It was a grand estate in Wiltshire, but that morning it felt cold. Workers carried out antique chairs, oil paintings, and boxes of heavy porcelain. Andrew Parker Bowles stood on the lawn, watching the physical pieces of his marriage get packed into the dark interior of a truck. The public assumed this move was funded by a massive royal payoff. Rumors flew through London that the Prince of Wales had emptied a portion of his vast Duchy of Cornwall reserves to buy Andrew's compliance. The newspapers hinted at a multi-million-pound settlement designed to keep the retired brigadier quiet and comfortable. The financial truth was far less scandalous. The land registry records from that exact spring tell the real story. Andrew did not receive a single penny from Charles. He refused the standard financial packages offered by the palace's legal teams. Instead, he chose to walk away with nothing but his standard military pension. Middlewick House had to be sold to cover the existing mortgages and outstanding debts that had accumulated during the final, chaotic years of the marriage. Andrew wanted his children, Tom and Laura, to look back at the divorce records and see that their father had not sold their mother to the future king. He stripped himself of financial security to prevent the family name from appearing to be a business transaction. But the emptiness of Andrew's bank account reveals a much deeper, hidden arrangement. While Charles was not directly paying off Andrew, a powerful shadow was moving behind the scenes. Lord Goodman, a legendary and feared legal fixer in London, had been quietly visiting the Wiltshire area under a false name since late 1994. He was not representing the Prince of Wales, nor was he working for Queen Elizabeth. Goodman was operating on behalf of a secretive committee of senior politicians and Crown advisors. They had analyzed the monarchy's financial stability and reached a terrifying conclusion. If Andrew contested the divorce on grounds of Charles's long-term infidelity, the court would legally demand a full audit of the Duchy of Cornwall's private accounts to determine Charles's true net worth. That audit would have exposed the sheer scale of the royal family's hidden wealth at a time when the British public was reeling from an economic recession. It would have shown exactly how much money was flowing from tenant farmers into the prince's private pockets while ordinary citizens struggled to pay their taxes. Lord Goodman made it clear to Andrew that a public trial would trigger a constitutional meltdown. The monarchy could lose its sovereign grant entirely. Andrew was given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He could stay silent, take the blame, and live off a modest army stipend. Or he could fight for a fair settlement and risk destroying the very institution he had sworn an oath to protect. Andrew chose the army pension. He watched the truck drive out of the gates, knowing he had saved the crown's billions while sacrificing his own financial future. The files were closed, the house was sold, and the public believed the lie about a golden handshake. The palace officials sighed with relief in their wood-paneled offices, ticking his name off their risk assessment logs. They believed the financial threat had been entirely neutralized the moment the property deeds for Middlewick House were transferred to a new buyer. Yet, money was only the first layer of the palace's anxiety. A far more dangerous problem was bubbling under the surface of Andrew's forced retirement. A military man with no assets and a broken home has nothing left to lose. The Grey Men knew that Andrew still held his official military clearance codes, his personal diaries, and his deep connections within the intelligence services. They had successfully starved him out of his family estate, but they had accidentally created an independent operator who knew the layout of every royal residence in the country. By the summer of 1995, Andrew had moved into a small, rented flat in London. He kept his uniform immaculate, but his daily routine changed completely. He spent his afternoons inside the library of the United Oxford and Cambridge University Club, filling small blue notebooks with detailed timelines. He was tracking the specific dates when royal protection officers had been reassigned from his own security detail to cover Charles's private visits to Camilla. He was building a defense file, not for a courtroom, but for his own survival. The palace security apparatus noticed his movements immediately. They realized that taking away Middlewick House had not broken his spirit. It had simply removed him from their direct line of sight. A penniless brigadier with a grievance was a direct threat to the upcoming public relations campaign designed to rehabilitate Camilla's image. They needed to find a way to re-enter his life without making it look like intimidation. In August 1995, Andrew received a private letter at his club from a palace intermediary. The document offered a guaranteed future for his children, matching Tom's entry into the publishing world and Laura's art career against Andrew's continued silence. The shadow over his property shifted directly to his bloodline, forcing a final choice between personal justice and his children's success. What Princess Diana whispered in the gallery. The rain pounded against the canvas of the hospitality tent at the badminton horse trials in May 1991. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool, damp earth, and expensive champagne. Andrew Parker Bowles stood near the back exit, holding a gin and tonic, his eyes scanning the crowd of aristocrats and military officials. A sudden hush moved through the tent as Princess Diana entered, flanked by 2 protection officers. She did not stop to speak with the event organizers. Instead, she walked directly toward the corner where Andrew stood alone. The press corps was trapped behind the barriers outside, their long lenses blurred by the heavy downpour. For 3 minutes, the most photographed woman in the world stood inches from the husband of her husband's mistress. Diana did not shout, and she did not shed tears. She leaned toward Andrew and whispered a single, chilling sentence that changed how he viewed his entire reality. She told him that they were both being treated as operational variables by the same gray men at Buckingham Palace. She warned him that his phones were being tapped by the security services, not to catch him in a scandal, but to monitor how much he knew about Charles and Camilla's private movements. Diana looked Andrew dead in the eyes and told him that the palace had already decided their marriages were collateral damage. The machinery of the state was already drafting the blueprints for a new court, one that required the absolute elimination of both Diana and Andrew from the royal matrix. Andrew returned to his quarters at the Household Cavalry Barracks in London that evening and immediately went to work. He did not launch a public tirade, nor did he leak stories to the tabloids. He used his military clearance to initiate a discreet investigation into the security protocols surrounding his official residence. Within 48 hours, an intelligence contact confirmed Diana's warning. A surveillance device had been planted inside the telephone junction box on the wall outside his Wiltshire home. The line was active. Every conversation he had with his children, every military directive he issued to his officers, and every argument he had with Camilla was being recorded and transcribed for a high-level committee operating out of the cabinet office. The realization shattered Andrew's sense of duty. He had spent his entire adult life defending the realm, surviving the active battlefields of Northern Ireland and the dangerous streets of colonial assignments. He believed in the chain of command, the honor of the regiment, and the sanctity of his oath to the Queen. To discover that the state apparatus was treating him like an enemy combatant was a betrayal that cut deeper than his wife's infidelity. He realized he was not fighting a personal battle against a romantic rival. He was locked in a room with a multi-billion-pound corporate entity that viewed his personal dignity as a threat to its global brand. The tension escalated to a breaking point during a private polo match at Cirencester Park in July 1992. Charles was playing for the home team, and Andrew was officiating from the royal box. After the final whistle, away from the gaze of the spectators, Andrew intercepted Charles in the changing rooms. The confrontation was brief and clinical. Andrew did not mention Camilla's name. He did not demand an apology for the public humiliation of his family. Instead, he dropped a handwritten list of the surveillance dates onto the wooden bench next to Charles's polo gear. He looked at the future king and delivered an ultimatum. He demanded that the state surveillance on his home cease immediately, or he would use his upcoming retirement speech at the United Service Institution to reveal the espionage to the international press. Charles turned pale. He did not deny the surveillance, nor did he defend the palace advisors. He told Andrew that he had no control over the security service's actions regarding constitutional protection. The prince left the room without picking up the paper, but 48 hours later, the surveillance device vanished from the wall in Wiltshire as quietly as it had arrived. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Andrew knew his victory was temporary. The palace now viewed him as a dangerous wild card, a highly trained military strategist who possessed hard evidence of state-sponsored espionage against a British citizen. On June 29, 1994, Andrew sat in his armchair, watching Charles confess his adultery to millions of homes on national television. The palace press office had carefully engineered the broadcast schedule months in advance to force Andrew's hand. By making the infidelity a matter of public record, the state stripped Andrew of his ability to maintain his marriage without looking completely complicit. The public focus was funneled into a sordid love triangle, ensuring nobody looked closer at the intelligence reports or the blacked-out files inside his desk. Andrew looked at the screen, realizing the true depth of the trap. If he stayed, he was a laughingstock. If he fought, he was a traitor. The palace had used the media to achieve what they couldn't achieve through intimidation. They had isolated him from his peers, neutralized his military leverage, and prepared the public for the inevitable final act. The physical proof of this manipulation came to light a few weeks later. Andrew received a plain brown envelope at his London club. Inside was an unredacted copy of the BBC's broadcasting schedule for that financial quarter, along with internal memos from the Palace press office dated 6 months before the interview. The documents proved the entire television event was a long-planned institutional realignment, not a spontaneous moment of honesty from Charles. Andrew realized the Palace had been setting the stage for his exit while he was still wearing the uniform of the Queen. He packed the scheduling documents into a small leather briefcase alongside his private logs. He knew that any direct retaliation would instantly result in a court-martial under the Official Secrets Act. The state had covered its tracks using national security laws as a shield, but the briefcase contained one final anomaly that the Palace advisors had overlooked. It was a receipt for a private courier service that had delivered a package from the Cabinet Office to Camilla's address on the night before Diana's hospitality tent warning. Andrew locked the case, realizing the betrayal was not just a historical event, but an ongoing operation now moving toward its final, lethal phase. The secret files from the Hyde Park bombing shrapnel and shattered glass littered the tarmac of South Carriage Drive on July 20th, 1982. Smoke rose from the remains of the household cavalry escort vehicle, and the air smelled of gunpowder and burning metal. 4 soldiers and 7 horses from the Blues and Royals lay dead on the ground after an Irish Republican Army nail bomb tore through the routine changing of the guard. Andrew Parker Bowles, then a commanding officer, arrived at the scene within 4 minutes of the detonation. His uniform was splattered with blood as he pulled surviving men from the wreckage and coordinated the emergency military response. The public hailed him as a rock during the regiment's darkest hour, but the files generated by that specific tragedy became the weapon the Palace used against him decades later. The hard documentation from that investigation was compiled into a thick, blue government folder labeled Operation Ironclad. For 20 years, these papers were stored in a secure basement at the Ministry of Defense under a 40-year secrecy rule. The official report detailed the security lapses that allowed the terrorist cell to track the exact route of the cavalry horses. In 1993, as the marital crisis between Charles and Camilla reached its peak, a duplicate copy of this folder arrived on the desk of Sir Michael Peat, the financial mastermind behind the royal family's restructuring operations. The Palace was not looking at the files to study military history. They were looking for a vulnerability that could compel an honorable officer to comply. The tension turned concrete during a meeting at the Cavalry and Guards Club on Piccadilly in October 1993. Sir Michael Peat did not present a legal brief or a divorce proposal. He laid out a single page from the Operation Ironclad files. The document showed that a young junior officer under Andrew's command had flagged a suspicious vehicle on the perimeter of Hyde Park 3 days before the bombing, but the warning had been buried in the administrative paperwork at the barracks. As the commanding officer, the final legal responsibility for that administrative failure rested on Andrew's shoulders. Sir Michael Peat looked across the table and explained that if the public ever discovered the regiment had ignored a direct warning, the reputations of the dead men would be tarnished, and the regiment itself could face a public inquiry. The threat was clear, precise, and entirely deniable. The Palace was threatening to rewrite the history of the Hyde Park bombing, to make Andrew look negligent, destroying his military legacy and the honor of the Blues and Royals. Andrew knew the administrative backlog had been caused by a government-ordered staff shortage, not by his own negligence. But he also knew that the British press would run the headline without checking the complex details of military logistics. The Palace had found his absolute breaking point. He could survive the loss of his wife, and he could survive the loss of his home. But he could not allow the memory of his fallen soldiers to be dragged into a public relations war over a royal marriage. Andrew left the club and walked through Green Park toward his quarters. He did not call his lawyers, nor did he seek counsel from his friends. He knew the system had trapped him, using his own loyalty as bait. If he cooperated with the quiet divorce timeline, the duplicate copy of Operation Ironclad would remain in the secure basement, untouched and unread by the public. If he resisted, the files would find their way to a Sunday tabloid via an anonymous leak from a government department. The Palace had weaponized a national tragedy to secure a domestic resolution. Yet, as Andrew compiled his personal papers for his final retirement from the Army in 1994, he discovered a crucial administrative error made by the palace courtiers. Sir Michael Peet had left a photocopy of the Operation Ironclad extract on the table at the Cavalry and Guards Club, and Andrew had slipped it into his pocket. The back of the page carried a digital time stamp showing it had been printed from a computer terminal inside the cabinet office on the very morning Charles had approved his own upcoming television interview. The two operations were linked by the same digital footprint. Andrew locked the time-stamped photocopy inside his secure locker at the Household Cavalry headquarters. He had no intention of using it to blackmail the future king, but it served as his insurance policy. The state had proven it would use the bodies of his soldiers to protect the reputation of the Prince of Wales, breaking every rule of military honor in the process. He had accepted the silence to protect his men, but the physical existence of that timestamp meant the palace could never completely breathe easy. They had forced him into a corner, but they had left a paper trail that proved the crown's ultimate victory was achieved through cold-blooded institutional leverage rather than a simple marital breakdown. Why a broken heart never made the headlines, Andrew Parker Bowles stood at the altar of the Chelsea Register office in February 1996. He wore a plain gray suit instead of his military uniform. Rosemary Pittman stood beside him, holding a small bouquet of winter flowers. There were no royal photographers outside the building, and no crowds gathered on the pavement. The marriage registry entries for that day show only a handful of close friends signed as witnesses. This quiet ceremony took place exactly 1 year after Andrew's divorce from Camilla became final. The media framed it as a quick rebound, a simple story of an aging bachelor finding companionship after a public marital collapse. The timing of this wedding was not an accident of romance. It was the execution of a binding family arrangement. In October 1995, Andrew had sat down for lunch at the Turf Club with Mark Shand, Camilla's brother. Mark did not come to discuss family gossip. He delivered a specific message from Highgrove House. The Prince of Wales wanted to ensure that Andrew's upcoming marriage to Rosemary would not trigger a fresh wave of media interest in the past. Charles needed Andrew safely settled into a new, quiet life before the palace could begin the long process of introducing Camilla as his official partner. The tension in the arrangement centered on the future of Andrew's children. Tom was 21 and Laura was 17. They were both entering the age where their social standing could be easily ruined by palace politics. Mark Shand made it clear that if Andrew remained a bitter, single divorcee, the press would continue to use him as a stick to beat Charles and Camilla. But if Andrew remarried quietly, the story would die, and his children would be rewarded with direct access to the prince's inner circle. Charles was offering to pay for Tom's university expenses and secure Laura a prestigious position in the London art world. The price for their future was Andrew's public display of contentment. Andrew accepted the terms at the Turf Club table. He chose to look happy for the sake of his children's careers. The strategy worked exactly as the palace planners intended. Tom Parker Bowles eventually became a successful food writer, frequently supported by royal connections, and Charles even became his godfather. Laura grew up to manage major art galleries in London, her social circle fully protected from the fallout of her parents' divorce. Andrew had bartered his own public reputation to buy a normal life for his children, ensuring they would never be frozen out of the world they were born into. But the most profound secret behind Andrew's compliance lay hidden in a medical file at King Edward VII Hospital. In November 1994, just weeks before the divorce papers were drafted, Andrew had undergone a routine military physical examination. The doctors discovered a severe cardiovascular anomaly that required immediate, high-risk surgical intervention. The medical logs indicated that his long-term prognosis was highly uncertain, with doctors predicting he might not survive to see the new millennium. Andrew kept the diagnosis entirely hidden from his fellow officers and the public. This medical reality changed his entire calculation regarding the divorce. He realized that if he died while still legally married to Camilla, she would inherit his modest military pension and a mountain of unresolved debt from the Middlewick House estate. She would be left financially vulnerable and socially isolated, trapped in an ambiguous relationship with a prince who could not marry a divorced woman under church law at the time. Andrew did not step aside because he had stopped caring for his family. He stepped aside because he believed he was dying, and he wanted to clear the path so that Charles would be forced to take full financial responsibility for Camilla's future. Andrew survived the surgery, beating the medical predictions that had driven his choices in 1994. He lived to see the dawn of the new millennium, and he lived to attend Charles and Camilla's wedding at the Windsor Guildhall in 2005. He sat in the pews as a guest, watching the woman who once shared his name take her place next to the future king. The reporters covering the event noted his presence as a sign of modern aristocratic maturity, a civilized resolution to an old scandal. They did not know that his presence was the final checkmark on a 10-year-old palace contract. He watched the ceremony, knowing he had successfully delivered everyone to their designated destinations. His children were secure, his ex-wife was protected by the wealth of the Duchy of Cornwall, and his own medical file remained a secret. But as the wedding guests moved toward the reception at Windsor Castle, Andrew walked back to his car alone. He had fulfilled every clause of the unwritten agreement, but the true mystery of his survival was now taking a different turn. He had outlived the diagnosis that had forced his hand, but he was about to discover that the palace machine had one final, unexpected role for him to play in the new reign. The loneliness of the ultimate royal insider Andrew Parker Bowles stood in the marble hallway of Westminster Abbey during a state event in late 2025. He adjusted the medals on his chest, including his honors for military service in Rhodesia and Northern Ireland. The television cameras swept past his position, panning quickly toward the center aisle where Queen Camilla walked alongside King Charles. The presenters broadcast live commentary to millions of homes, tracking every jewel in the crown and every senior royal in the procession. Andrew remained on the edge of the red carpet, a face in the crowd of dignitaries, entirely unacknowledged by the lens that used to follow his family's every move. The official protocol records from the Lord Chamberlain's office show his exact placement at these major state events. He is consistently listed on the guest registers, but his seat is always positioned several rows behind the working members of the royal family. He receives the standard formal invitations due to his rank as a retired brigadier and his historical ties to the court. However, the palace seating plans are designed with mathematical precision to prevent him from appearing in the same television frame as the Queen. The institution keeps him close enough to monitor, but far enough away to maintain the public barrier between Camilla's past and her present. This physical distance became starkly apparent during a private reception at St. James's Palace in early 2026. Andrew attended as a former commander of the household cavalry, sitting at a round table with senior military staff. During the event, Camilla entered the room to greet the guests, moving table by table with her private secretary. When she reached the military section, her staff smoothly redirected her path toward the foreign attachés, bypassing Andrew's chair by a distance of several yards. The movement was seamless, practiced, and entirely unnoticed by the other guests in the room. The separation reveals the final, ongoing condition of his 30-year agreement with the crown. Andrew survived his 1994 heart surgery, outlived his second wife, Rosemary, who passed away in 2010, and now lives a largely solitary life in his Wiltshire village. He watches his children, Tom and Laura, attend high-profile palace dinners as the stepchildren of the king, while he remains behind his locked gates. He has kept every promise he made to the Grey Men in 1995, never publishing a memoir, never selling a quote, and never correcting the tabloid stories that branded him a failure. But the true mystery of his current position lies in a small blue identity card issued by the Royal Parks Administration. The card grants Andrew unrestricted personal access to the private grounds of Hyde Park Barracks at any hour, day, or night. This privilege is rarely extended to retired officers who have been out of active command for over 3 decades. It is not a social courtesy or a standard pension benefit. The security logs at the barracks gate show that Andrew uses this pass at least once a month, always arriving after dark when the horses are in their stalls. He walks through the stables, speaking quietly with the young troopers and checking the tack rooms. The palace security team continues to log his entry and exit times with forensic precision, tracking his movements through the military compound via the closed-circuit television network. They know he is not there to cause a disturbance or leak information to the press. He is returning to the only place where his name still carries its original weight, far away from the multi-billion-dollar corporate machinery that stripped him of his home, his marriage, and his history to protect the stability of the British throne. Andrew Parker Bowles gave up his home, his career stability, and his reputation to protect his family and the stability of the British crown. He chose a lifetime of quiet dignity over a multi-million-pound media circus, proving that the deepest royal secrets are often carried by those who stand just outside the frame.